heritage a priority in crisis? This is the question. And I think in the past 10 years, we've witnessed the impact, an increased number of crises around the world, being it conflict, being it natural disasters, or even disasters. And there is a serious impact on culture. And I remember in 2013, when I led the first mission with some prominent experts to Timbuktu after the liberation. It was a call to respond. It was a response to a call by the communities who said the world should not forget about us. So it was not us, the community, it was the world. When we see our homes destroyed, when we see our cities destroyed because of conflict, because of natural disasters and everything, it is our social fabric that is gone. It is our cultural references. It is what makes us being human. And when I went to Timbuktu, I went to see a great man who was the grand imam of a beautiful mosque which was built in the 14th century. And I asked him, why was it so important for us to come? And he said, I wanted you to come because our heritage is like our lung. Without it, we cannot survive. We know we will get out of this, but to be able to recover, we will need our culture, because that's what makes us human. And without it, we are nothing. It's like we are being denied our existence as human. And this is what we are going to discuss. Why is heritage a priority when at the same time we have to look at basic needs, humanitarian needs, and everything else? So we have a great panel with three prominent personalities, which I would like to invite to join us. Alexander Keller, who's the director of the National Museums of Brazil. Marilyn Barrett, who's a heritage conservator from France. And Ala Younis, who's an artist and an independent publisher from Jordan. Welcome, guys. I would like to start with you, Alexander. I think last September, many of us saw on television something terrible, the fire of the National Museums in Rio. And that was terrible. Mm-hmm. So I would like to ask you, what was the impact of this fire? And why we could see that not only Brazil, not only the people in Brazil, but all over the world were so sad to see it, because this could happen to any of our museums anywhere in the world. So can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Mr. Lazar. But before I answer it, I would just like to acknowledge the organization of the Abu Dhabi Cultural Summit 2019 and UNESCO for giving us the opportunity and to share a little bit our experience about this really big tragedy. As you pointed out, September 2nd, 2018 is one of those dates that everyone is going to remember, at least in Brazil and also outside Brazil. It was a terrible day when about a museum which is the largest scientific and cultural institution of Brazil with over 20 million items went through this fire. And I will answer this in two ways: the effect on the Brazilian society and the way I can see the effect that it had worldwide. For the Brazilian society, I think the right answer, the main effect, is around a question. How could a nation, a country as big as Brazil, that has this very important economic position in the world, is one of the 10th largest economy, how could it allow its largest and most ancient institution pass through this fire? I think that that's one of the main questions everyone is asking. And the saddest part of this is that we all were talking about it. I mean, I was in the job only 6 months when it happened, but decades we are talking about the importance and the need that we have to invest in culture and scientific institutions, for all in museums. And also it shows us, on the other side, the resiliency of all those peoples, the Brazilian society. We want to rebuild that museum. From the international part, it may sound a little bit odd what I will say now, but it has shown us the importance that other nations have given to our museums. We received so many support letters. I cannot acknowledge enough UNESCO for being among the first international institutions on the scene, trying to help us, to guide us through this terrible tragedy. So I think that's the main takes on those both.
Thank you very much. I'd like now to go to you, Marilyn. You've worked a lot in Yemen and in Palestine. And you were awarded the Aga Khan Prize for the restoration of Al-Abbas Mosque. And can you tell us a little bit why the heritage in Yemen, it's so important in a post-crisis, when we want to get out of the post-crisis? Why is heritage preservation so important?
Thank you to talk about this mosque. I will start to answer to you, not exactly directly, but just to tell you that I was very surprised first time I came to Yemen about the way people were concerned about their heritage. I was really, really impressed. And it was something natural. It was just the beginning of the first years of the discovery in archaeology, in Yemen, and also the first museums. And they came from villages, mother, family, and so they come to visit the museum. And immediately when they saw the beginning of this museum, they started to do their own small museums in their villages. And it was, one of the villages was very close to Sana'a, and people, one guy came and said, "Oh, you are doing that? Okay, we'll do the same." 2 months later, we came to the village, and we saw this guy use the whole house of his family and do a small museum with, craft museum, and very well done, with means he had in his hand. But now, because you talk about crisis, and crises, of course, we are all touched and sad about what happened in Yemen with this so rich culture, and I think, of course, it's destroy what it was done, culturally and socially grounded, And so now we don't know what will happen in Yemen, but I think I am optimistic because we saw when we work in this country, first it's a big richness of heritage, because there is a lot of in pre-Islamic and Islamic culture, and also intangible heritage, but people are concerned about that. And so I think it will happen. They will find a way by themselves. Okay, we can help them, but I'm really optimistic about the Yemeni themselves.
You said that it will be done. I mean, there is a message of optimism
Yes,
in what you're saying.
They already, well, many things were, because already they have in their culture the valorization of their own heritage. You know, it's natural, as I say. They use that. When I arrived, I saw that in the banknotes, on the stamps. They use all the illustration of their heritage everywhere. Even in the public monument, I was surprised. We arrive at the entrance of a gate of the village, and you have the illustration of the last discovery, and so. And without distinction, they illustrate as well the South Arabian culture, pre-Islamic culture, and Islamic culture at the same level. And so the new situation will not destroy this natural interest on that of the past. You know,
this optimism, I'm sure it's shared by you, Ala. Your work as an artist was exhibited in 2015 in La Biennale in Venice. And the project was a plan for Greater Baghdad. And if I remember very well, what you were trying to do is to portray the fact that art can also be very important in redemption, in liberation, in ideas that we need to share to struggle, some of the bad of what, the destruction of heritage could be. Can you tell us exactly how you have, what you did exactly through this work?
Sure. So Plan for Greater Baghdad is on a gymnasium that was designed by Le Corbusier and named after Saddam Hussein. And I found this about this museum, about this gymnasium. I always call it a museum, but it's a gymnasium. I found about it from the images of an architect whose name is Rifat Jadirji. My project was basically to find, I was curious to know what links these two men together, Le Corbusier and Saddam Hussein, because probably they've never lived together. They've never met or been in the same time frame. And with this unfolding of this history, what comes out is basically a full illustration of how architectural and art monuments were, and as well as like the urban plans and the master plans and the cultural projects were the first to be revisited at every turn of a political or new government or a new political system in Iraq. And within this history, at every time that a project changes, there is this probably like a number of people who were trying to do their own job. They're trying to understand their own heritage, reproduce it as architecture or as art, and respond to, at the same time, to the requests or to the interventions of the political systems. So the project comes out as portraits of all these like responses, basically to when the political system comes and intervenes in the natural, let's say, path of someone who's trying to deal with, like, for instance, like the modern project or the modernity in Iraq, and revisit heritage, revisit archaeological, not the archaeological findings, but like the remains of the empires on the, how do we reproduce it in our time. This is all affected in the process of course, changing plans all the way through. And my project was on this, in fact, on how artists and architects were always part of this immense redirection of efforts all the time. And at the same time, I studied architecture myself at the time when Iraq was going through the Gulf War or the blockade years afterwards. And it was amazing to see how in the absence of, for instance, built architecture, examples of built architecture like those of Zaha Hadid, for instance, we were studying her drawings while people, like students in Baghdad of my age, were studying her architecture through examples of poetry. And it was very interesting to see how everyone had built on this multiple layers and multi-year products of language and of built architecture and of all other things to compensate for when the building or when the product or when the monument is not there. So the project is basically goes around all these moments.
Very good. Now, I think the lecture that you brought, it's quite interesting, and you started mentioning that you were not doing it alone. You had architects and I'm sure many other people who also work with it. And I'm coming back to you, Alexander, because I think what we would like to understand here is the fact that, for what I see is that actually we should not only look at the situation of the crisis, but we should already start, thinking of the post-crisis, and what will be the role of culture in, of course, trying to build, all what will be necessary for resolving the crisis and moving forward and toward, a sustainable situation where everyone is okay. With the disaster of the National Museums, you've received many, there was a chain of solidarity, if I may say that, from all over the world. And it continues. I mean, even from individuals, and some of them I'm sure are here around the Agora. And 6 months after, and even before that, I heard you sometimes, coming and say quite strongly your needs, and to try to get some of the basic things. 6 months after, that means today, what lessons have you learned which you would like to share actually with us? And what kind of support have you received?
There are several lessons that actually I would happy to share with all of you, and I hope that some of you at least might attend the workshop that we're holding in the afternoon. The first thing is, Brazil is a very peculiar country. You have no idea the influence of foreign institutions, foreign people saying what is important. Of course, we have to make the decision, but just to point out, it is important. We need to do something. That was perhaps the best contribution we could receive, because it raised the awareness of our government for what they have lost. Because we're talking about decades of underfunding. And in that sense, we were able to secure some funds. We don't have them already, but they are promises. We got a couple of $1 million now for the stabilization of the building, because the stabilization of the building allows us to go inside and to rescue our collection that are still preserved in the rubble. It's something very important, Lazar, and I think everyone should know that. We have not lost everything. Yes, we lost a lot, but we had a long plan, and that was essential to remove the items and the collection out of the palace to small buildings that we were having in different areas. And we were able to remove the vertebrate collection, birds, fishes, mammals. We were able to remove the botany collection with some very old specimens collected in the times of when Brazil was still a colony. And several of those collections were saved. The basic support that we need right now is, yes, we still need some financial support, essentially for the basic cost of the day-per-day items. You may not believe that. We're talking about millions for the rebuilding of the palace, but we don't have sometimes resources to buy water, to buy brushes, to buy other small items. It takes so long to have that. So this is something that's one of the helps we could need. And the second great item is specimens. What we are asking everyone, and also responsible for institutions, for other museums, is to write us support letters, saying something like, maybe when you're ready, we might donate original specimens, because this is the best what we can have for our own government, to show them the importance of the rebuilding of our museum, because Brazil needs to deserve this new collection. And the only way we're going to deserve is to provide a palace with the best measurements of safety for people, and here I mean visitors and technicians, and also for the new collections. So this is essentially some of the basic help that you can do. Just a letter. It doesn't cost much, but it may change a lot.
Very interesting. Very, really. You've been very courageous because just a few months after you arrived, and you had to deal with this crisis. And
yeah, to be very honest, I mean, I don't want to we only want to speak here, but let me just tell you something. When I was thinking about becoming the director, it's a long story, but I will make it short. Some people came at me and said, "What are you doing for the museum?" And I was kind of saying, well, I teach, I do classes, and I do my research, and I put the museum open to the public. I have a very large interaction with the media. And some people said to me, that's not enough. You are a prominent scientist, you have prizes all over the place. It's your time to think about taking the museum and making a difference. So when I came into office, my two sons, I have two sons, they're lawyers. I don't know if there are lawyers here, but you understand what I'm trying to say. And both told me, don't do it. You don't need it. It's too risky. Just don't do it. And my answer to them was, if people that can make the difference don't take those institutions, you're not going to change the country.
Wonderful. Yeah, wonderful. This is really inspiring, and we all hope that with what you said, we will all make the difference, because this is about us as a community. And I'm coming back to you, Marilyn. We spoke about some of the situation, and at the same, I've been to Mosul, I've been to different places, and I saw exactly the same hope that, the heritage will be saved, not just for the sake of saving the stones, but definitely because of its meaning to the people. You spoke about the history, and everyone did the same. And this is what we would like to understand from you. What do you think in this kind of situation needs to be done exactly?
But to recover the pride first, and people are so attached with their heritage, in link with their identity, but at the same time, this is a common link they have together. And if a lot of things is lost, it's a way, I think, starting by heritage, it's an easy way and a mean to put together, to reorganize together the commune values, the commune roots, and to get back a kind of dignity, as you say, and the nobleness which is so impressive when you arrive in Yemen about all the level of the society, and because they are fed with this continuous culture, and since without break, in fact. And it's inside their own identities, inside their own way of life, in fact.
I want to come back to you, Ala, simply because if I take the case of Mosul in Iraq, for example, or even in other places in Syria, everywhere, when I was speaking about cities being destroyed, and social fabric, and even the environment, it didn't only affect, just the communities as people living there. It affected everyone who was working, even artists, even painters, musicians, and the whole community. And it was about, you know, it's about revitalizing everything. So, I mean, what do you think, as an artist, how do you think your role could be understood and even recognized in trying to contribute to help people recover from crisis through the heritage and the culture in general?
First of all, I think we live in crisis and post-crisis situation at the same time,
That's
where
true.
we are always like feel that we need to prioritize our efforts towards certain urgent aspects, while at the same time we're losing some of the real interesting and important resources in the way we prioritize other things. And so, I mean, I'll maybe just continue to speak about how, like, what I did in my project is basically through this history, this 25 years that took between commissioning and building it, and the aftermath, how this building would have survived the wars and destructions, and all of this revealed much of a lot of the processes that artists and architects were engaged in managing all these projects throughout these times. But these stories do not exist as one finished written narrative. All the stories were fragments, and they had to be pieced together from written books, but also sometimes from interviews, and sometimes from informal, comments from people, and sometimes when the documents were not there in archives. And by the way, archives are the results of people, for instance, who own an office. But what about I was also interested about the people who work in the office, who do not own the documents, and so they do not take them home, or they do not deposit them in collections at universities afterwards. I mean, both are important, but there's there's even another layer of fragility that is still there, that in a history that we are part of, and have shaped a lot of what we do today. And so I was doing a lot of interviews and doing a lot of building on content that is not necessarily full or fully present. And within this build-up, sometimes I had to create my own documents, and also to make choices throughout the way to show them documents that I find, because maybe there's less access for people to find these materials as well. So, I mean, I'm not saying that this is the role of artists, but I'm saying that this is what was happening in my project, particularly. And as I finished the first edition of my work, which you spoke about, that was shown in Venice, I was aware that there were no women featured in this project, because they were not of the same power relations that appeared between all these heads of states and heads of architectural firms and famous men. And so I decided to reproduce the same narrative through looking at the female work, or the female architects, but also not just, they don't have necessarily to be architects. And so the writings of, for instance, someone like artist Noha Radi, when she wrote her diaries during the war, the Gulf War and the blockade years afterwards, were very revealing of how not just that any work on heritage or tradition or any of that was not in a position where people are just looking after that, because they were just looking after ways to either survive the war, or in Baghdad or outside of it. And so, but there are very interesting images that are written in her, and she's an artist, so she could have made them as artworks, but she writes them down. And so my work was on also trying to find in the work of artists where they did not necessarily draw or paint, they could also have illustrated to us some of this dealing with the time of crisis. And if I can add just one more idea.
Go ahead.
Is that the whole idea of also like relating to heritage and prioritizing work with, or just having so much fear over archaeological findings, and all of this is great, but at the same time there is a great fragility that the modern, like the work of our modern era, this architecture of the people who made things in the 20th century, let's say in Iraq, which have traveled and influenced the type of architecture that we see in the Gulf or even in Jordan, is at danger as well, because it's they might have been already bombed in the different wars, because some of them were state institutions, but there is also no protection laws that would, protect them, and so by the time we come to them, we've lost probably much of this work that is already present in our present. So there is, I think, part of what we need to think about altogether is how we protect also our modern legacies.
Excellent. No, thank you so much. And because I like to give also the opportunity for many people who came around the world here to probably ask you some specific question. But before that, I would like to give you 1 minute each, because I recall when His Excellency Mubarak said that this is a place where we need to ask the questions, and because it needs to help us to go back and see how we are going to think again about how we are doing, we think about the role of culture. And I think this is an opportunity to share this. And the question at the beginning was, why is heritage a priority in crisis and post-crisis? And I'd like you to give us, in 1 minute, only your view and what you think it's important to look at culture and heritage, and that is a priority. So who would like to start? With your experience, Alessandra.
Okay, I can start with that. Well, essentially, is the experience that we had with this strategy is people hold to something. People identify themselves with their cultural heritage. And I think this is also why we got so much support from outside, because our museum was the palace of the King of Portugal. We had 2 emperors living in our museum. One was even born there. We had the first Republican Constitution written in that place. Furthermore, we were home to mummies from Egypt, to material archaeology from Italy. So, and people really care for those things. One of the most impressive points that I received is when I had the Egyptian consul coming with me, talking about the mummies and the artifacts, and he was crying. That made a real big effect on me. So I think each time when you have a crisis, you go back to who you are. You go back to your things. You go back to your identity. So that's definitely something we have to take in mind.
Thank you very much. Marilyn?
Yeah, I think I follow you, because it's exactly what I felt. I think that for Yemen, we also talk about Yemen and the crisis. And I think the heritage will give a link again, because it's already, this link is there. But at the same time, they already did that because there is a revolution in the 60s, and they moved the imam. But they moved the imam, but they didn't destroy the history of the imam. They kept the house of the imam like it was when they just, you see even the toys of the babies of the imam, and so they kept everything. It was destroyed recently, but it was kept. So they never renounce about any piece of their identity, even among crises. And it's why I think it will be they will succeed now. Excuse me, because I'm very moved about this situation, actually, because it's part of my work and of the work of my colleagues. But this situation will be
okay. No, we understand. Thank you very much. We understand. Ala?
I think that first of all, like, heritage is made of so many, like, it's the result of the work of so many people, so many, like, experiences that culminate in certain entities. And if we spend the time really, like, trying to preserve heritage and just be very busy with that. Also, we are also in this position where we are only accepting and liking and acknowledging, and not having necessarily the time to maybe revisit this heritage and try to, take it to a different dimension. So there is this, one of the architects that I met, he said he was part of the commissioning committee for all these like modern monuments that were in Baghdad, and he was saying they were not necessarily the greatest projects, but what we wanted is that people walk into modern architecture that could also be in somewhere else in the world. So it was about just being in the moment where you can make your choices towards what do you want to belong to. Beside, like you are, your heritage is safe and it's there, and you're not, busy all the time just trying to keep it safe somehow, and just be part of what is happening worldwide. And so this is what I think is why we should preserve heritage, is basically maybe because we don't like it.
Wonderful. And in four words, what you've said, it's that heritage help us define ourselves as humans.
Yes.
So
but yes, also
this is what you said. And I think that's the reason why we're here, and we need to keep it. So I think we have few minutes, Mohammed, for specific questions.
Thank you. Thank you. Fantastic. Absolutely. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. We'd love absolutely. Sir, great question. Please introduce yourself and the question.
Thank you. My name is Raymond Assombang. I come from Cameroon. I feel really, really touched by the experience of Alexander, because I myself, I am director of the National Museum, which is housed in an old presidential palace with all electrical and water installations. And every day I go to bed, I keep thinking, what would happen if there was a disaster like they experienced? And in fact, we have had 2 fire outbreaks, but we succeeded in putting them out. So, in my village, you are seen to be a very bad babysitter if the baby dies in your hands. Yeah. And I think that is exactly the situation in which Alexander finds himself, or found himself. But I am very, very encouraged by the statement you made. If people don't take those risks, then there would never be change. And I think that has encouraged me very much, because I felt like you, why me to be in this position? But before I end, I just also want to make a contribution. I'm not asking any question, I just want to say, heritage is important, at least to me, or to the part of the country where I come from, or part of the world where I come from. Heritage is part of the spirituality of the people. It's part of the religion. And when you talk about religion, you are talking about sentiments. And I can see how we would not consider those things to be the most important things in our lives. So I think heritage really, as we have all said, it defines the people who we are, but it is part of our religion, part of our ancestral worship. If the people don't have that, some of those articles, they would be cut off from their ancestry. In Africa, people don't die. They just change their form, and they continue to live, and they are consulted when there is a disaster, so they continue to live, and we connect with them through the heritage. So it is very, very important for us. And I hope that during this summit, there would be a recommendation to the Brazilian government, so that they know that the whole world thinks about what has been lost. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely.
May I answer quickly to to what he is?
Yes, and of course, quickly. I've got a question over there.
Okay.
Do you want to take that question first? Yes?
Okay. Okay, my name is Ali Ulisidi. I am from Mali. I am a former site manager of Timbuktu and former technical advisor of the Ministry of Culture of Mali. I am very interested about this panel as site manager. And I am having two questions for our colleague, Alexander. I would like to know the reasons or the origin or the roots of this disaster. Is it a natural or is it due to a group of people like in 2012 in Timbuktu, cultural heritage like Mosul Mosque were destroyed by a group of people? So is it due to human beings or is it? And my second question has to do with the strategy. For me, you need to think about a strategy during the post-crisis. Did you start to think about it? If yes, what are the great lines about this strategy? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Since both questions are essentially directed to me, if you allow,
In 1 minute.
I have 1 minute and I will break the protocol. First to you, you're right. You're right about the baby. So you know how I'm feeling. But it's also liberating. I lost everything. I lost my name. I'm a prominent scientist. Now I'm the director of the museum that was caught on fire. But that's liberating, because now I will reconstruct it. And if I push my government as more as I can, so disasters like that won't happen again. We have other museums in that bad situation. And to tell you, very briefly, number one, apparently there was an electrical failure, so it was not criminal. We don't know yet. The federal police is still doing its investigation. And yes, strategy. I have a strategy. We will not be able to rebuild the museum if large part of the Brazilian society, but also of the international community does not help. We will not be able to do that. Our museum is just too big. It's not a small. It's the oldest scientific and cultural institution from South America. Over 20 million of items. We had material from all over the world. So we need your help. And our strategy is to be here and to show you the problems. Thank you.
I mean, we can take one more question. It's been obviously something of great importance to all of us. All right. If it's okay, lunch won't be cancelled, but I'll just take 3 questions, if that's all right. We'll move to this side. There was one here. Yes? 1, 2, and 3. Fine, 4. But please, brief. Yes?
No,
thank you. And 4. Thank you very much for the others for understanding.
Yes, hello. My name is Elizabeth Markovich, and I developed a platform and a TV station which shows only art as a pure experience. And I happen to have a son who developed a VR software which could allow you all in this room who are concerned by heritage to make a new way of showing arts and all the works, and more importantly, to give all the stories, because we all know about the disasters, but we have to construct the narratives all around that. And that I think that as the summit is about technology, I think this is where technology is extremely useful, and not just photographies and things like this, but the experience, because you have to touch the people. And so that's, I wanted to ask you if you are having any technology strategy, as the gentleman was talking about before.
Maybe I can answer this one quickly, because we will have a session during the week on technology. And I'm sure you will, the people that we've invited will be able to elaborate more on it.
For instance, in my work, I did reconstruct the missing characters or moments through 3D sculpting and 3D printing. So we've been trying to use technology when we can.
Yes. Same in Yemen. We trained long training about the scanner laser and so and 3D, and there is a team. They document the majority of the monuments, so this is why I'm optimistic about the reconstruction also of some of them, and they continue to be trained actually even during this crisis. So there is a technology and used by Yemenis themselves. So it's.
And we in our museum we also have a lot of tomography done on our specimen, including several important items, and we also will be able to use this to reconstruct with the pieces that we have recovered to reconstruct them.
Great.
But there are other strategies which I cannot talk about now.
Okay, quick question, and it's directed at the gentleman from UNESCO. So the dictionary definition of heritage is the full range of our inherited traditions, monuments, objects, and culture. So my question to you is, a lot of African art was looted during colonialism by the British and, of course, the French. The French government has decided that some of that African art is going to be given back to some of the African nations. The British haven't said anything. What's your take on that, and what does UNESCO plan in terms of making sure that our culture and our art is given back to us? What's your take on that, and what does UNESCO plan to do about that?
Thank you very much.
Do you want me to, just in 2 seconds?
Very brief, definitely.
In
for
2
time's
seconds,
sake.
I would like to come back to what His Excellency said. I think this is a forum for us for discussing together the issue.
Yes.
And this is what we're trying to do. And definitely during lunchtime, I will be explaining it to you in separate.
Thank you. That's all right. We've got just another question, very brief, please.
I'm not sure if it's a question or a commentary. Actually, I think it's probably important to recognize that heritage is... I come from Egypt, so this is very also pertinent to Egypt. How heritage is used by totalitarian regimes and colonial powers to actually control the populations. And this is why people react against heritage. And this is also, links to the previous panel about elitism and populism. It's very important to recognize that, and I wonder why the title of this panel is "Why is Heritage a Priority?" Well, I think it should be, is heritage a priority in times of crises, especially in countries like mine?
And to you, the answer is it? Brief.
It's a very complicated answer, and where I come from, in time of crises, heritage is not a priority now.
Well, thank you for sharing. And one last question. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Carolina Guerrero. I live in New York. I run a Spanish language podcast company for Latinos, but it's a regional company. I mentioned this just to give context. I cover content Latinos in Spanish and tell their stories for a whole continent. So my question is this: Latin America is affected by a lot of migration now. Venezuelans are going all over the country, having to leave their country. Haitians are moving to Chile or has moved before with Brazil too. We have the crisis at the border in the United States with Central Americans, and those people and families are being separated now. Those people are losing everything. So we were talking about, Lazar, you were talking about that you, as a human being, we just go back to our heritage and try to make sense of things. And the question is, how can artists address this problem for people now instead that it is a reflective thing, like in the Mediterranean, this is happening everywhere, no? So it's is there a way for people to get resources or tools now for them to make sense of it now instead of having to wait 20 years so artistic institutions go back and try to keep it as a heritage? I don't know if it was clear, but I'm trying to address that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will try to answer this. I think the way I could piece together the history of history of like, let's say, the last 60 years of architecture and art experiments in Iraq was from the meetings and the efforts and the stored memory and like all these things, like the images that people have taken already. So it's all through individual efforts. It's just through meeting people who have, on an individual basis, have compiled materials throughout their work and or information or stories, and their willingness to share part or sometimes not to share some of these materials. And so it was in the absence of institutions that could provide you these services. It was people on a personal level that were doing this, and sometimes as groups. And then other people coming or arriving at this effort and trying to make something out of all of that. So I think, yes, what we need maybe also is also to be ready with ideas when there is a crisis and we start losing, like someone who has a collection dies, and this collection can be just documents. They don't have to be, they can be receipts. They don't have to be, state documents. Sometimes like the smallest thing can also tell great things about how things were happening. And much of this is lost sometimes because people make priorities when they leave from the places where they live in during war. And so they don't take everything, but then these things, when they remain, they inform us a lot. And we don't have to wait for institutions to do all this work for us. I mean, it's great if we have them, but if we don't have them, it's collective work that we need to do ourselves.
Fantastic. Fantastic. I'm afraid we have to stop here, but I mean, on that point, definitely it's finding solutions and ideas of preserving, saving our stories. And I think this session has moved us all. Definitely, it's very personal. But thank you so much for being here. Before we leave, it is lunchtime, so please enjoy lunch. But we have to, cut it short. If possible, if you can be back within, say, 50 minutes, we'd really appreciate it. And the reason is we've got then a set of workshops, which I insist that all of you must take part in. It's very important. I know it's been a long day, but it's been a very good, fruitful, long day. I hope you all agree with me.